Hi everyone, my name is Shaurya and welcome to my channel. If you are watching my video for the first time, please click on the subscribe button below and press the bell icon next to it for regular updates. This is the second part of my video lecture series on types of government. In the previous video, I dealt with the unitary form of government, and in this video, we are going to talk about the federal system of government. So without wasting any more time, let's begin. Now let us take some time to understand the meaning of a federal system of government, or federalism as we call it. The very origin of the term federal has come from the Latin term fidus, which means an agreement or a treaty. So in a manner of speaking, we can say that a federal state or a federation comprises a smaller number of states which decided to give up or forfeit some part of their authority so that they can come together and be recognized as a larger sovereign state. Now, while we are studying the federal system, the first thing that we should keep in mind that there is a constitution, and that constitution is considered to be the supreme law of the land in a federal state. Now, the constitution works on the basic principle of division of powers, which means that the constitution divides the entire power of the state between the central government and the state governments in the respective provinces. Now, as far as the division of power is concerned, the constitution follows a very systematic approach in this regard. Usually, it's practiced that the matters of national importance are vested with the central government. For example, subjects such as defense or finance or international relations, all these subjects are considered to be of national importance, which is why the central government has been given the exclusive authority to legislate and issue any directives on these subjects. On the other hand, matters which are of regional or local significance have been entrusted with the state governments. Now, because the constitution is considered to be the supreme law of the land, it means that the constitution is sacrosanct. This also means that neither the central government nor the state government can overstep their administrational boundaries that have been set for them by the constitution. They cannot violate any provision of the constitution. Both the central government and the state government in a federation enjoy their respective autonomy. Neither of them can interfere with the working of each other. For example, the state governments cannot actually overstep their boundary and interfere with matters which are under the central government. Similarly, the central government has no authority to go on interfering or creating disturbances with the functioning of the state government who are legislating on their own subjects. So we can see that in a federal state, the constitution is usually written because it has to be really detailed in nature for implementing the entire system of division of powers. For example, India is not exactly a federal state. It's a state which follows federalism to some extent and also has unitary features, which is why it's called a quasi-federal state. Even in that, India has the largest constitution in the world because it accounts for each and every detail which has to be kept in mind or which has to be implemented while we are following a federal structure. On the other hand, the USA also has a very comprehensive constitution because the United States of America is one of the purest example of a federation. It works purely on a very federal principle. There are state governments and central governments. The constitution provides for autonomy to both. On the other hand, we can now move on and take a look at some of the definitions of a federal system. Now, the first definition provided by Montesquieu states that a federal government is a convention or an agreement by which several similar and smaller states agree to become members of a new one. Now, Garner provides a much better definition of a federal system. He says that a federal government can be defined as a system of central and local governments combined under a common sovereignty, both the central and local governments supreme within their respective spheres, marked out for them by the general constitution or the act of parliament which creates the system. Now that we are done with the meaning and definitions of this concept, let us move on to the features. Alright, so the first and foremost feature of a federal state is division of powers, which means that all the powers of the state, including those of the legislature, executive and judiciary, are divided between the central and the state governments. It also means that both the central and the state governments are autonomous within their respective spheres, which means that they cannot interfere with each other. Secondly, the constitution in a federal state has to be written and rigid in nature. Written because the constitution is expected to contain each and every detail which is required for the implementation of the division of powers. If the constitution is silent or ambiguous in even a single aspect, there is a scope or an opportunity of a conflict between the central and the state governments on that particular issue. Therefore, in order to avoid such conflicts, the constitution is made elaborate and comprehensive to cover all aspects on how both the sets of government are supposed to work in their own jurisdictions. The constitution is also made rigid because in a federal state, neither the central government nor the state governments can be permitted to unilaterally make any amendment to the constitution that would completely disrupt the administrative process. Therefore, in order to encourage the collaboration of both the central and the state governments for any amendments, the constitution is made rigid and the amendment process is made very complicated. For example, in the United States, the US Congress, which is the central legislature, makes the proposal for any amendments to the constitution and then it has to be ratified by the states. A federal state is also characterized by the supremacy of the constitution. As we have already discussed, the constitution in a federal state is considered to be the supreme law of the land. It is considered to be the source of all power. Therefore, as such, both the central and the state governments are under a legal obligation to abide by the letter and spirit of the constitution. Under no circumstances can they overstep the boundaries that has been set for them by the constitution. They cannot violate any provision laid down by the constitution. Now, the constitution does clearly demarcate the jurisdictional boundaries between the center and the states. Now, some of you might ask that in spite of that, if either of the governments end up violating the constitution, what's the solution? The solution is an independent judiciary. Every federal state essentially has an independent judiciary because the judiciary has two very important functions to perform. Its first and primary function is to protect the constitution. How does it do that? Suppose any of the state governments or the central government has passed a law or an executive order which is contrary to the provisions of the constitution. In that case, the judiciary has something power called judicial review, through which it can declare that particular law or order to be null and void, as a result of which it ceases to operate. The second function performed by the judiciary is to settle the disputes as and when they arise between the central and the state governments or among the states. Next, the legislature in a federal state is usually bicameral in nature. This means that there are two houses, one upper house and one lower house. The lower house usually gives representation to the people of the state as a whole, just like we have the Lok Sabha in India, and the upper house gives representation to the respective provinces, just like the Rajya Sabha. Similarly, in US, the lower house is called the House of Representatives, and the upper house, which gives representation to the respective 50 states, is called the Senate. A federal state usually gives dual citizenship to its people, one saying that they are a citizen of the country and the other saying that they are a citizen of the respective province in which they reside. For example, if I'm a resident of California, I'll have two citizenships, one saying that I'm a resident of the United States of America and the other saying that I'm a resident of California. Needless to say, a federal state is characterized by dual administration. One set of administration emanating from the central government, which is universal and applicable for all the people and organizations throughout the country, and the other set of administration arising from the state governments or the provincial governments, which may differ from province to province. Last but not the least, in a federal state, all the federating units or the provinces are considered to be equal. Nobody or no province is considered to be superior or more powerful than the other. For example, in the Senate, all the provinces are given equal representation. Each province sends 2 representatives to the Senate, and because there are 50 states in the United States of America, the Senate consists of 100 members. So this equality is maintained in all other administrative aspects. Now let us quickly take a look at the various merits of a federal system. The first of them being that it prevents the rise of despotism. Now, because there are certain hard and fast rules about the areas or about the jurisdiction in which the central and state governments can function, the central government finds it almost impossible to function in an arbitrary fashion. It has to abide by the constitutional regulations at all times, and therefore it has to respect the autonomy of the state governments. The central government has to function within certain boundaries, and due to legal obligations it cannot overstep those boundaries. Now, needless to say, in a federal system, the administrative efficiency increases to a great extent because there are 2 sets of governments at work. The provincial governments play an integral role in decreasing the burden of the central government, which is why both national matters and matters of local importance are adequately taken care of. Now, one of the greatest merits of a federal system is that it supports local needs. If you have seen my previous video, you already know that it's not possible for a central government to take care of the needs of the people throughout the entire state by its own, which is why the provincial governments come very handy. The provincial governments have been enabled in federalism to experiment with lawmaking and policy making which are suited to their respective provinces, and obviously those won't be applicable throughout the entire country. For example, a policy which is needed for Maharashtra and Maharashtra only may not be required for any other state. So this goes a long way in making sure that the people in each province are getting what they want in according with their wishes, with their aspirations and with their needs. Now, as I've already mentioned, the federal system of government is the most suitable form of government for big states which are characterized by a lot of diversity. Why? Because the provincial governments working in each province makes the entire local administration very efficient. Now, the federal system of government treats all the federating units or the provinces equally. So, in other words, we can say that the federal system supports weak states which might otherwise find it very difficult to move forward or progress in the arena of development. It enjoys the equal support of the central government as any other state. So that works as a benefit. A federal system also encourages popular participation because there are 2 sets of governments at work, and therefore more and more number of people will become aware and directly participate in the political process. So unlike a unitary system where there is only one set of government and therefore a lesser scope of participating in the political process, the federal system allows for greater participation. Now, because a federal system of government is characterized by a supreme constitution and an independent judiciary, we can say that it is democratic in nature, wherein public opinion, factors like public opinion and civil and political rights are held in the highest regard. So that's actually one of the merits of a federal system. Now let us come to the demerits of federalism. First of all, the system of division of powers becomes a source of weakness for both the central and the state governments. Now, because there are legal restrictions on their powers, both the central and the state governments find it very difficult to function efficiently. For example, the state governments always find themselves burdened with the interfering nature of the central government, and they often find themselves without the aid and assistance of the central government. On the other hand, the central government also faces difficulties because it cannot act entirely on its own. It has to coordinate with the state governments at all times, and it particularly becomes a menace when the state is under an emergency. Now, one of the biggest demerits of federalism is that the system of division of powers is very difficult and problematic to maintain. A federal state is almost always characterized by perpetual disputes and conflicts between the central and the state governments on the basis of their jurisdiction. Therefore, this obviously reduces the administrative efficiency of a federal state. Instead of focusing on the problems of the people or the problems of the state, the central and the state governments are mostly busy solving deadlocks with each other. A federal system also leads to reduced accountability, especially in cases where there are different parties at power in the center and in the states. There is an increased possibility that neither the state nor the central government will be ready to take responsibility and accept its flaws in the face of any incompetence on the government or the failure to deliver on a promise, or in case of any disaster. They resort to something called mudslinging, wherein they try to transfer the blame on each other. The central government says that the state government is responsible and vice versa. This becomes a huge problem because at the end of the day, nobody takes responsibility and the people are left to suffer for their miseries. The federal system is also criticized for being rigid in nature because the constitution provides for a rather difficult procedure for amending it. Therefore, there's a possibility that the constitution might not be amended frequently enough to keep up with the needs of the people and the changing times. Another demerit is that a federal system is an expensive one because you are essentially maintaining two sets of everything, two legislatures, two executives, two judiciaries, two sets of civil services, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be a drain on the treasury and financial resources of the entire country. Sometimes a federal system can also become a source of regionalism, where the interests of a particular region or province becomes more important than the entire country. So that has to be discouraged. Apart from that, it also gives rise to the danger of secession, wherein a particular state or a particular province expresses its wish to break away from the federation. So that becomes a demerit because the federation essentially aims to keep all the provinces united together. A federal state is also considered to be weak during emergencies because the central government cannot entirely act on its own. It cannot take unilateral actions or decisive decisions. It has to essentially consult the state governments, collaborate with them, coordinate with their efforts, and solve the emergency together. So that is considered to be a demerit because during an emergency, you are supposed to take quick action instead of waiting for consulting others. So friends, that will be all from me for this video. If you enjoyed watching this video, please do not forget to like, share and subscribe. If you have any feedback for me, please let me know in the comments below. You can also get in touch with me on Facebook and on Instagram. I've mentioned my profile links in the video description box. Apart from that, the upcoming episodes of my video lecture series is going to deal with two things, that is the presidential and the parliamentary form of government. So don't go anywhere, stay tuned to Shorty Vlogs.